Welcome everyone for joining us for our From Cells to Liberation, could cooperatives controlled by incarcerated persons be part of an abolitionist strategy? We have four of us who are going to be talking today. Myself, Ricardo Nuñez from the Sustainable Economies Law Center. Veryl and Hasmik will introduce themselves later in the portion, as well as Kelton, who will be calling in from San Quentin prison. So we might have to take a moment when he calls in just to connect him. Today's webinar is part of our May grassroots fundraising campaign, The Future of Work, where we are holding events and doing trainings and webinars to support all the work at the Law Center, but to help raise funds for our work, and in it focusing our public education and training and events on our labor focused work. So, and 10% of, I think there's somebody who's unmuted. If you can mute yourself, that'd be great. Thanks. And 10% of all donations that we receive during this month will go towards our solidarity partners, Somos Tierra Campesino Collective, which is a group of migrant campesinos in Sonoma County, California, working to incubate a farm worker-owned farming enterprise and acquire the land base for long-term sustainability and power building. So if Etel, you could drop the link to a donate page, that would be great. Also, we just want to thank our sponsors for our Future of Work grassroots fundraising campaign. So we're going to cover a lot today. We're going to be here for an hour and a half. So there's probably a few folks that I know will leave at the hour, since a lot of people over-agendize themselves, like myself, throughout the days. So if you have to bounce at the hour, we get it. We're recording this, like I mentioned, and we'll send out the recording. We'll also send out the slides. And then, as Etel's already been doing in the chat, for those here for CLE, California CLE Credits, you can sign in to the link that Etel provided. It's also the evaluation form and the MCLE required quiz that's there. So those things are there as well on that link. So what are we going to talk about over the next about hour and a half? I'm going to talk a little bit about SELC for folks who are newer to us. We're going to talk about why now, why are we working on prison cooperatives now in the political window in the California prison system. I'm going to talk, Hasmik, my comrade and colleague and friend, is going to be talking about California's current prison labor regime, the legislative and regulatory barriers. My comrade, colleague, and friend Veryl is going to be talking about abolition as an orientation and as a practice, and orienting us to that framework and how prison cooperatives may or may not fit into that framework and that conversation. We're going to be talking about social cooperatives as an inspiration to the work that we're doing. We're also going to be, and then Kelton will be calling in, and Kelton, he'll be talking about earth equity and cooperative vision. And how the work that we're doing kind of came to fruition. So, but to start us off, I thought I'd start us off with a poem just to ground us today. And so I'm just going to read a poem by Joey Harjo, who's a First Nation and Native American poet and a poet laureate in the United States. So, once the world was perfect. Once the world was perfect, and we were happy in that world. Then we took it for granted. Discontent became a small rumble in the earthly mind. Then doubt pushed through with its spiked head. And once doubt ruptured the web, all manner of demon thoughts jumped through. We destroyed the world we had been given. For inspiration, for life. Each stone of jealousy, each stone of fear, greed, envy, and hatred put out that light. No one was without a stone in his or her hand. There we were, right back where we had started. We were bumping into each other in the dark. And now we had no place to live. since we didn't know how to live with each other. Then one of the stumbling ones took pity on another and shared a blanket. A spark of kindness made a light. The light made an opening in the darkness. Everyone worked together to make a ladder. A Wind Clan person climbed out first into the next world, and then the other clans, and the children of those clans, their children, and their children, all the way through time to now, into this morning light to you. So I thought that was appropriate to help ground us and recognize and the darkness that we're all trying to climb out of as we build this world together. So yeah, thanks everybody. I know that's some of the energy that I was wanting to bring into today's webinar. So a little bit about Selk. So we are a worker self-directed nonprofit law center, and we exist to bridge the gap in legal expertise needed to transition from destructive economic systems to innovative and cooperative alternatives. And when we started, this was an old cartoon of some of my coworkers, I don't know, maybe like 8 years ago, and now we have more beautiful, amazing coworkers. This is from a recent retreat that we did where most of my coworkers are there. And we do work in a lot of different program areas. We do land back work. We're working on redistributing wealth by pushing against philanthropy and the different ways of wealth hoarding that happen with our current legal and tax systems. We work with immigrant-owned worker cooperatives and so many other things. So definitely check us out if you're interested to learn more. Part of our work is informed by a framework called movement lawyering, which is empowerment-driven lawyering, an emerging approach to progressive lawyering that fosters the collective action and active democratic participation of low-income and working-class people to reshape our social, economic, and political systems. And so within the field of law or lawyering, this is one of the movements that we take inspiration of, but we also look to many others for frameworks and inspiration. One of which is really looking at our economic system and how can we restructure it, and looking at economic democracy as one of those frameworks. One of my inspirations, and I know she RSVP'd for this, so maybe she'll get the recording. I haven't looked at all the participants who are here today, so maybe she's listening now, is Jessica Gordon-Nebhart, and who said, mainstream economics has a stranglehold on our possibilities. Economics can be liberatory instead of exploitative, and it is our duty to make it so. And so part of what we do at the Law Center is we're trying to live into that, to make it so. Another framework that we look to are indigenous communities and unlearning from ourselves. And so someone who did a lot of work studying resource management for indigenous communities was Eleanor Ostrom. She was the first, and for a long time, the only female to ever win the Nobel Prize for economics. And her Nobel Prize was for the analysis of economic governance, especially for the commons. And she came up with these 8 rules, design principles for common pool resource institutions, and how these rules were successfully used by self-organized and self-governing communities. And so as we're building those communities in different ways, we look to those rules and indigenous communities as inspiration and guidance. And also the complexities of those communities. And when we move into a space of self-governing regions, I'm here in Pátzcuaro, Michoacán, in Mexico, and very close by, there are many self-governing autonomous communities. And so part of my education here is learning the complexities of even the relationships between those communities and how they're not as cooperative as one might think. Another framework that we look to is the Just Transition Framework, which is a vision-led, unifying, and place-based set of principles, processes, and practices that build economic and political power to shift from an extractive economy to a regenerative one. Our friends at Movement Generation have been very inspirational for us in creating these frameworks so that we can bring their political education tools to communities and to the law. And also just recognizing that if the process of transition is not just, the outcome will never be. And so part of our work is to imbue the organizations that we work with and our organization with those principles, hence us being a worker self-directed nonprofit. And so our strategies really look at the different ways that we can intervene to move towards this future, whether it's our client work that prioritizes working with innovative projects led by frontline community members who are developing new solutions to systemic problems, or our policy work focused on removing barriers to democratic and just economies and building incentives to those types of enterprises, training legal professionals and community entrepreneurs and activists, and recognizing that culture plays a huge role in shaping both the economic and legal systems, and that it's hard to build what we haven't first imagined. So our education and communications try to spread a visionary narrative as well. And so as we move through our work, it's become more abundantly clear that it is human relationships that matter, not legal relationships. And so as a movement law center, we work to decenter the expertise of lawyers and support grassroots formations to realize their visions. And so it's, again and again, I keep coming back to Grace Lee Boggs' quote, "We are the leaders we've been looking for," and to remind ourselves and each other that that is true. So that's a little bit about self. I'm not keeping an eye on chat, but I know Isel is. So if you have questions as we're moving through this, or comments or feedback, feel free to drop them in the chat. Isel is going to capture them, and then we're going to have time at the end for general conversation about everything that we covered today. So, but first, why here? Why in California? And why now? So, basically, starting in 2019, CDCR, the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, we're funded, their staff, including wardens from multiple prisons, to go on study trips to Norway to learn about their prison system, their training facilities, their reentry programs, to witness the famed humanistic practices, delivering wellness, safety, and empowerment in Norway and the Norwegian prison system. And so these trips laid the groundwork for the California model that Governor Newsom introduced last year. And so Governor Newsom of California decided that the prison system was broken and that he was going to implement reforms to reform the California prison system. And so these 4 pillars are the 4 pillars of the California model: normalization, working to create a prison experience that mirrors life in the broader community; dynamic security, which is an approach that promotes positive relationships between staff and incarcerated people; care mentorship, which is a program seeking to train incarcerated individuals to use their lived experiences to mentor and support their peers; and then also to become a trauma-informed organization, which is how they interpret it is CDCR. It commits to improving the practices and policies and culture of the entire department by educating staff at all levels to recognize the impacts of trauma and ensure the physical and emotional safety of all staff and incarcerated individuals. I've heard some stories from Kelton about how this is actually playing out and how some of those positive relationships that are being built actually lead to some of the correctional staff, the police inside the prison, getting doxxed. So there's a lot of complications there. And so why are we doing this work at San Quentin? Well, San Quentin was the prison that Governor Newsom decided to roll out this California model, and it's the guinea pig. And part of the reason that he chose it as the guinea pig was because it's already the flagship prison in the California prison system of rehabilitative programs, of innovative programs, of services and offerings to the prisoners. And Kelton also told me about how California prison, the California prison system usually sends good or non-violent folks to San Quentin as a reward, because there they can access more of these types of services. So that's why at San Quentin we're working on developing these in the political window that has opened up for us to do this work there. And so we started working with Kelton, and Kelton is part of an organization called Earth Equity. And Earth Equity is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to reduce recidivism, eliminate unjust food practices in prisons, jails, and fence-line communities, and nurture system-impacted people. They do this by creating programs which educate incarcerated people, support returning citizens, and strengthen the communities and ecosystems to which they return. And so Earth Equity is partnering with Sustainable Economies Law Center to do this work. And Kelton will explain more of the history of Earth Equity and his relationship to Earth Equity. But part of the reason that they got interested in co-ops was because Kelton was doing a lot of healthy food initiatives in prison, and reached out to us when someone turned him on to co-ops, and he realized all of these programs that he was developing, these healthy food initiative programs in prison, should be run cooperatively. Another program I'm just going to highlight that Earth Equity does is their Sea Forested program, which is a current project of kelp reforestation from the inside out. And it engages abolition ecologies to facilitate mutually restorative relationships between system-impacted people and kelp forests in Northern California. They provide high-quality environmental justice education. They're investing in researchers, organizers, and educators who have experienced incarceration. They're developing relationships with community partners in cooperative development, aquaculture, restoration work, and BIPOC food sovereignty. And they're co-creating intentional humanized spaces for connection with the land and sea. And we're working with them to co-develop some curriculum on cooperative development. And so Kelton reached out and started sharing some of the work that he'd been producing to let us know where he was coming from and what he was trying to do. And Kelton wrote, "In a world where communities of color remain the most impoverished and the most affordable foods are also the most deadly, food has become the most fatal club swung by structural racism. And nowhere else is the harm of the food desert more pronounced than in jails and prisons." And so Kelton developed a framework, Food as Medicine, and put these ideas out there. And part of this redesign for the California prison system is that there's actually prison councils that are directly reporting to the governor's office on what new programs should be implemented. And so Kelton has been producing some work, Food as Medicine, Right to Heal strategies, etc., papers, and then sending them up to the governor's office for implementation. And part of that is that these programs should be cooperatively developed. So Delts worked with Earth Equity. So when they reached out to us and were really interested in cooperative development, we started getting deeper and deeper in our relationship. And we decided to focus on a few different areas of work. So one was co-developing cooperative structures. So we're trying to design, which I'll describe a little bit later, the cooperative structures that will be allowed under the current regulatory and legislative framework, or maybe creating structures that push against those frameworks. And so this is this is Veryl and Hasmik outside of San Quentin when we went to go visit Kelton there, which was a profound experience. We're also looking to draft legislation and do policy advocacy. So we were talking through this last legislative cycle with California legislators to find an author to change some of the regulations and policy to allow for prisoner-owned cooperatives but we were unsuccessful in getting an author, but we're going to try again at the next legislative cycle. We also do a lot of research. And so looking at the current legal boundaries of prisoners working and running businesses inside of prisons, looking at the current joint venture program, which is what Hasmik is going to be talking about next. So at this point, I'll pass it over to Hasmik. If you could introduce yourself and take it away.
Thank you, Ricardo. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining the CLE. My name is Hasmik Geghamyan, and I'm one of the staff attorneys at SELC, and I work both in labor circle as well as in land circle. So my work ranges with cooperatives, labor compliance, as well as land justice, land return work. I am going to talk about California's prison labor regime. And the next slide will show, we're going to go over these like main 4 sections. I'll be as quick as possible. Also, there's translation happening, so just trying to be mindful with that. So one of the 4 areas is the key entities involved in California's prison labor regime. So they're the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, also known as CDCR, and then the other one is California Prison Industry Authority, CALPIA or CALPIA. Then we could go into the main laws and regulations governing prison labor, specifically the penal code sections, as well as the Title V of the California Code of Regulations. And then we're going to talk about the financial profiteering of prison labor, including efforts to abolish involuntary servitude in California. And then lastly, we're going to spend some time on California CALPIA's joint venture program, which is a carve out and a possibility where co-ops might be implemented, although there are number of restrictions with that too, and Ricardo as well as Kelton will dive into that later. So key entities. CDCR has currently, as of 2022, incarcerated population of close to 98,000 people, and within its 35 facilities. And CDCR also manages the state prison labor programs. The most common one is the inmate work assignments, and it involves prison maintenance jobs like laundry, kitchen prep, janitorial duties, as well as agriculture, which are mostly prison farms. There's the conservation fire camp program, and then educational and vocational training program. The other entity is CALPIA, which is a semi-independent, self-sustaining, and I put that in quotation marks because we'll talk about it more in a bit. It's an agency that aims to mirror the more customer-focused private industry work environment. And the most popular program under that one is Healthcare Facility Maintenance, HFM, and then Industry Employment Program, some manufacturing and printing services, the joint venture program, as well as the free venture program, and that one's for young people. So with healthcare facility maintenance, CDCR actually contracts with CALPIA to clean healthcare facilities in all state prisons. And with the next slide, so what is CALPIA? So back in 1982, California legislators established CALPIA to reduce the operating costs of the CDCR. And CALPIA currently operates over 100 factories in 34 facilities and produces over 1,400 goods and services. It includes office furniture, clothing, license plates. CALPIA is managed by the Prison Industry Board, which is composed of 11 members, including the Secretary of CDCR, as well as legislative and gubernatorial appointees. So one thing, like you can see there's a red arrow here. We found out in our research is that California Penal Code Section 2807 requires for state agencies to purchase products and services offered by CALPIA whenever possible. So in fact, CDCR is CALPIA's largest customer, accounting for over 2/3 of all sales in 2020 and 2021. And there's a link to governor's proposal for CDCR operations, the 2022-2023 budget, which expands on the funding and the contract agreement between CDCR and CALPIA. And then fast forward to 1990, the voters in California passed Proposition 139, which expanded it, also known as Prison Inmate Labor Initiative. And this proposition amended the state constitution to allow private businesses to utilize prison labor, and they call it joint venture program. And this is also managed under CALPIA, and there's a nationwide certification program. So many states have this program, and the certification is called Prison Industry Enhancement Certification Program. So this became codified, and I'll go through the key California regulations in the next slide. So that became codified under California Penal Code section, and these are the main codes. There are more than these, but these are the key regulations and statutory provisions that govern California prison labor. And of course, 2807, it mandates that state agencies, including CDCR, purchase goods and services from CALPIA. And then sections 2700 to 2792, it establishes work programs through CDCR and CALPIA, generally talks about the rules on employment of prisoners, and then Title 15 of the California Code of Regulations, which governs pay rates and work programs. So the next slide, I actually got this from ACLU's report. They published, it's called Captive Labor Exploitation of Incarcerated Workers. As you can see, it identified, someone mute, I could, it identifies the minimum wages for incarcerated.
Right.
Hey, Abe, can you mute yourself? Or someone, yeah. So it identifies all the different states with minimum wages for incarcerated workers. And as you can see, California is on a darker shade, which indicates it's one of the lowest. And so that leads to the next conversation, which is about financial profiteering of prison labor. So 95% of incarcerated workers, laborers in California have prison maintenance job. And then 5%, which is approximately 7,000 people, work for CALPIA. So 95% have maintenance jobs, and then only 5% work for CALPIA. And then as far as production, how much work they produce, or in monetary terms, they produce more than 2 billion a year in goods and services, and then 9 billion a year in services where they're housed nationwide. And then most incarcerated workers, they're not protected by standard federal and state labor protection laws, or the right to unionize, or overtime protection, and workplace safety. And here is a chart of pay rates and schedules. As you can see, it is like there are 5 levels. At the bottom, level 5, it starts with 8 cents. At the top, level 1, it starts with 32 cents an hour. And there are current efforts to improve the wages. In the next slide, you'll see right now the campaign is to increase from 8 cents to 16 cents an hour. And then with the highest skill levels going up from 37 cents to 74. I was trying to understand, like, what are like states' justifications or excuses to maintain this like extremely low wages. And of course, the main one is California State Constitution, Article 1, Section 6, which does not allow for involuntary servitude unless it's to punish, unless it's a punishment for a crime, which is linked to the 13th Amendment of the US Constitution. And then the other explanation is that this is rehabilitation focused. People are incarcerated. These jobs improve them, help them rehabilitate. They're getting new training. And then the third justification is that it's easy to follow standard schedules and rates. So both CALPIA and CDCR follow the regulations and the rates that are set. And it takes, possible campaign and like legislation or even a ballot measure to change the wages. I see there's a comment in the chat. Right, Mary Sutton says California prisoners are property of the state. That's correct. Okay, so just want to highlight the efforts to abolish involuntary servitude in California. So the first time it was back in 2022. It was called California Abolition Act. And it passed the state assembly, but it failed in the Senate. Governor Newsom's office estimated the financial impact of paying incarcerated workers minimum wage, and it would cost the state $1.5 billion annually. And then currently there is another effort to amend the state constitution. It's called ACA 8 and is known as End Slavery in California. It was introduced by Assemblymember Lori Wilson. And it passed the Senate. There's a link to the Assembly Floor analysis dated May 19, 2023, just so you know more details about where it's at. And it's currently in State Senate. So we'll see what happens. And our colleague Kelton also has some thoughts on this, especially coming from places throughout the states where even though some states abolished involuntary servitude, the wages are still fairly low. So I got this from ACLU again. Marlon from Soledad, California, expressed his support to end slavery in California, stating that the current system of involuntary servitude isn't enforced by an actual physical whip anymore. Instead, it's a legal whip. And this is a prison labor report survey that ACLU conducted, as well as from Bureau of Bureau of Justice survey. And as you can see, the feedback from prisoners is that 70% said they were not able to afford basic necessities with their prison wages. And 76% report being forced to work or face additional punishment. So the selection or freedom not to work is very limited and mostly not present. So let's go into the joint venture program now. So this was the one that was established in 1990s, and it allows for director of corrections and any public entity, nonprofit or for-profit entity to enter into a contract to employ prisoner labor And those who do, they're called joint venture employers, JVEs. There's a structured net pay distribution where only 20% is placed in incarcerated individuals' trust account. And then another 20% deposited in savings account, which is available to the incarcerated person upon their parole. And then the rest, 20% goes to CDCRs as a reimbursement for room and board. 20% goes to individuals' restitution fines or paid to local crime victims program. And then another 20% is sent directly to the person's family for support, like child support or other court-ordered garnishments. With this program, the governance within JVP's Department of Corrections, so there is an advisory board consisting of 7 members, and then in terms of the selection of like who gets the joint venture contracts, there's a criteria that considers the impact of the program on California jobs, and then gives priority to businesses that planning an expansion, facing a deficient labor pool, starting a new enterprise, repatriating an offshore operation, or relocating to California from another state. So that's the criteria. There's more, the regulations, the Title V regulations have broader criteria. And of course, the CALPIA's website has far more details on this. Okay, next. So with JVP, businesses where non-incarcerated workers, when they go on strike, it means that the employer isn't allowed to continue operations with prison workers. So there is, limited labor union, some solidarity happening. Of course, the lockout is different because they're incarcerated, but I thought that was a cool nugget within this program. And then dangerous working conditions. I just wanted to point out the last bullet point here is that 75% of incarcerated workers say that they're required to work or face additional punishment, such as solitary confinement, denial of opportunities to reduce their sentence, and loss of family visitation. So they have no right to choose what type of work they do and are subject to arbitrary, discriminatory, and punitive decisions by the prison administrators who select their work assignment. And then as of 2022, there are currently 6 JVP programs throughout California, and these are the type of businesses currently in place. Our research showed that there are only 13 people involved in this program, in JVP program, all across California, which is super low. We contacted the manager, CalPIA's manager, well, JVP's manager for this program, to find out why, and we haven't heard back. So I'm just curious to find out more about why there is such low number of participants in this program. And then some restrictions, challenges. One is Code 2812. It prohibits sale of prison-made products, wholly or in part by prisoners, unless authorized by law, like through CALPIA. The other one is the Department of Corrections is allowed to cause the prisoners in state prisons to be employed as needed by the state or in other state or county or district. And then all prisoners have to be employed under the supervision of wardens. And then the other restriction limitation, of course, is that structured net pay distribution. And last, and we're going to expand on this more, but cooperatives as a pathway. 70% of workers surveyed by Bureau of Justice Statistics say that the most important reason for working is to develop skills that they can use to build careers after release. But most prison labor programs fail to provide incarcerated workers with transferable skills. And then studies also show that people who had some savings when they left prison and got jobs after their release were less likely to recidivate. And then, of course, cooperatives could possibly provide living wages despite being subject to that structured net distribution, ability to afford necessary expenses like child support, phone calls, commissary costs, and then support their families and saving for eventual reentry into the society and ownership in the business. And yeah, that is all, and I'll pass it to my coworker, Veryl. Thanks.
All right. Peace, y'all. My name is Veryl Powell. I am a staff attorney at SELC, and my work flows between the land, labor, and housing circles. Here at SELC, we foster a culture of critical introspection and routinely ask how our strategic vision and work advances and connects with different movements for liberation. So with this in mind, how does the current project initiative to build a cooperative in San Quentin connect with the contemporary abolitionist movement? Many of us here at SELC identify as abolitionists, so we're likely to hold different opinions on the meaning and practice of abolition. So what follows then are a few of my own preliminary thoughts to shape a conversation among all of us and potentially here today in the Q&A about possible connections between the solidarity economics and abolitionist movements. To start, there is a common conception of abolition as penal or police abolition, which narrowly views carcerality as confined to one institution, namely the prison or the police, respectively. Abolition, then, is a call for negation of these carceral institutions. In contrast, many contemporary abolitionists frame carcerality as a systemic logic that permeates society from top to bottom, weaving through all institutions, big and small, and entrenched in our daily mindsets and interpersonal relationships. Under this view, carcerality functions to reinforce a foundationally unequal system of capitalism, where a small class of beneficiaries endlessly seeks to accumulate profit. This class stays in power by hoarding wealth, mistreating the earth as property to be extracted, traded, or sold, and exploiting fellow human beings as wage labor. Carcerality coerces us all to accept our own wage exploitation or face premature death. So by asking who benefits and taking an economic and geographic analysis of carcerality, we begin to see carcerality embedded everywhere from childhood on. Take, for example, our formal education system as one such site of carcerality. Classrooms are set up hierarchically to reinforce discipline, and deviant youth are diagnosed with disabilities or punished by teachers who are bound by mandatory reporting rules. Law enforcement and SROs are stationed in every school. Even the content of school curriculum is designed to train conformity into an exploitable worker by rewarding punctuality, rote memorization, and efficient standardized performance that saps the creativity, aliveness, and self-determination out of learning. Under this broader view of carcerality, police and prisons are the last line of institutional defense in the protection of private property and the caging of human beings who fall outside the labor force. Yet if these institutions appear the most obvious example of carcerality, it is also due to its exponential prevalence since the 1980s. Here you see a table created by the Brennan Center illustrating the explosion of prison population in the 1980s. When Ronald Reagan took office in 1980, the total prison population was 329,000. And by the time he left office, the prison population doubled to 627,000. This intentional drastic increase in incarceration came as the particular form of capitalism restructured from industrialization to neoliberalism. Here's a slide of a rough periodization of capitalist accumulation in the United States, inspired by contemporary Marxist thinkers. What I am focusing on here is the transition between the bottom two periods of capitalism. As manufacturing no longer provided the same profit margins for capitalists, the primary mode of profit accumulation shifted to financialization, where profits are increasingly made from speculative reinvestments in financial instruments and real estate. This has meant that yesterday's industrial workers are today's prisoners or debtors. Because more and more Americans are rendered surplus to the needs of industrial capital, they're increasingly precariously employed or permanently unemployed. Police and prisons thus play a material function under neoliberalism to warehouse or incapacitate the surplus population, lest they revolt against the capitalist class. It would be remiss of me not to state the other obvious dimension of police and prisons. It has, from its foundation in settler colonialism and slavery, been a mechanism to construct and reinforce racial boundaries by means of state-sanctioned violence. And so even though there is a generalization of precarity among all Americans today, its impact is heavily racialized, as you can see here. So returning to my earlier point, if carcerality is a systemic logic, then abolition is on the one hand the negation of such logic. But abolition is not just negation, but also a positive overcoming of existing conditions through the concrete and spiritual practice of world making. That is to say, abolition is an ethical practice of present tense visioning or infrastructure in the making that gets us closer to collective liberation grounded in relationships to land and fellow human beings based on common stewardship, care, and mutual aid. This positive dimension of abolition raises the perennial tension between reform and abolition. Abolitionists argue that prisons and police aren't broken, but operating exactly the way they're designed to. Just as you can't reform a plantation designed for slavery, you can't reform prisons and police designed for racial capitalism. So traditional reforms like calls for civilian review boards, DEIB trainings, and diversity police hires, body cams, elimination of money bail, the list goes on, as we're all familiar with, they ultimately reinforce carceral logics by leaving intact institutions of carceral power and racialized state violence. James Kilgore, a formerly incarcerated person, uses the term carceral humanism to critique contemporary penal reform measures in California that attempt to repackage mass incarceration as care-providing facilities where prisons and jails have become the new asylums, and the jailers are waking up to the fact that mental health facilities also represent a new cash cow. But far from taking a black and white approach to the question of reform versus abolition, many contemporary abolitionists have opted for a more nuanced approach, distinguishing reforms between reformist reforms and non-reformist reforms. While reformist reforms continue or expand the reach of carceral logic, non-reformist reforms decreases the logic and gestures at a fundamentally distinct system or set of relations that aim at getting right our relationships to each other and the earth, seeing that if we transform our practices, then we can live in abundance. Non-reformist reforms empower communities to participate in world making by experimenting with context-appropriate alternative structures and processes to solve problems and meet community needs, rather than relying on carceral logic and systems, and by extension, capitalist logics like extraction, alienation, and scarcity upon which carcerality furthers. A common example of a non-reformist reform is building transformative justice responses to gender and sexual violence instead of or in place of incorporating restorative justice directly into police-based systems. The latter simply increases budgets for policing systems under the guise of reform, or as we just talked about in the words of Kilgore, carceral humanism, while on the other hand, grassroots community-controlled transformative justice critically addresses the inseparable nexus between police and gender and sexual violence, and it gestures at new ways of community care, healing, and relating with one another that are not rooted in carcerality. So where does the work of building cooperatives run by incarcerated persons fit into the spectrum of abolitionist reform? While we ought to be cautious about whether increasing funding towards prison programming merely reinforces carcerality, I am of the opinion that when connected to the larger solidarity economics movement outside of prisons, prison cooperatives can be a non-reformist reform that gets us closer to the horizon of a future beyond capitalism and thus a future without prisons. Prisons by design destroy any last shred of humanity left among incarcerated persons. Present wages and labor conditions complement the constant surveillance and violence in prisons to reinforce the disposability of incarcerated persons. Cooperatives then gesture at restoring the humanity of incarcerated peoples rather than criminals condemned to incapacitation and cast away from society. Co-ops redefine incarcerated persons as human beings capable of being healed, reciprocating care, and connecting with transformative movements on the outside. Cooperatives not only aim to pay incarcerated persons a more dignified wage commensurate to their labor, but empower incarcerated persons to run their own workplace. This sort of empowerment radically renegotiates one's conception of self and relations to others by restoring their voice and agency, and allows incarcerated persons to cooperate with each other across rigid identity lines to make decisions that impact their collective livelihoods. So even within conditions of confinement, co-ops begin to slowly displace the footprints of carcerality and exploitation with new social and economic relationships. In turn, these new relationships and values formed inside through prison co-ops allow returning citizens an alternative point of reentry by connecting them to the solidarity economics movement. Instead of formerly incarcerated persons fending for themselves through a precarious labor market that imposes barriers on applicants with criminal records, worker co-ops on the outside can provide formerly incarcerated peoples with a community of mutual care, support, and employment through alignment with co-op principles. Of course, this is going to take intentional intersectional building across what have thus far been two distinct movements for transformative change. But the realization of this possibility can mean the reduction of cages in the long run, because as incarcerated peoples return to society, they'll already have the skills, values, and connections to participate in the broader solidarity economy ecosystem. The interconnection between movements not only provide a real possibility for a decrease in recidivism, but can also substantially reorient our society as a whole towards a future beyond capitalism and prisons.
Thank you for that, Veryl. Just doing a little mic drop, but so appreciate that. Towards the end of your section, Kelton called in, and so before I get to my section about the models that we're developing and the inspirations for those models, I'm going to pass it to Kelton, and Kelton can let us know about his process and his work getting to this place, and why he's viewing cooperatives as part of this conversation around abolition. So Kelton, feel free to take it away.
Okay. Am I coming through all right? Can you guys hear me out there?
Yep, we're getting thumbs up and nods of yes.
Okay, cool. Beautiful. Yeah, so I'm excited to have an opportunity to answer this question, respond to this question. How do prison co-ops fit into an abolitionist agenda? From the perspective of an incarcerated advocate who has been working on carceral policy for almost a decade, the question of how prison co-ops fit into an abolitionist framework is easy to answer. I'll highlight three dynamics by which prison co-ops help to dismantle the carceral system, or will help to dismantle the carceral system. First dynamic relates to reentry. People return to society from prison. Financial security is an enormous factor in how successful their return will be. Good financial security strongly promotes successful reentry and sustained social reintegration. Returning home after a period of incarceration is almost never easy. Transitioning back to life in the free world can just be amazingly trying. When you're unable to support your family during incarceration and then present a financial burden upon your return, the transition can be rocky. But if you spent your incarceration earning a living, supporting your family, and can provide for yourself on day one of your return, the transition can be much more smooth. This supports the cause of abolition by reducing recidivism, shrinking prison population, and thereby starving the carceral system of body power. Second dynamic by which prison co-ops would help dismantle the carceral system relates to the state's ability to operate prisons. In short, co-ops enable incarcerated workers to divest their labor from state enterprise. No secret that prisons would be much more expensive to operate if they did not have a deep well of free labor to draw upon. And every worker that is given a well-paying job by a prison co-op is a worker who will not work for the state for free. The third dynamic relates to anti-poverty. Prison co-ops will help fight poverty both inside and outside of the carceral space. And every step towards a more economically just society is a step towards a society that is less plagued by criminalized behaviors, less likely to invest psychologically into carceral logics, and more populated by people who have the wealth necessary to resist biased courts and incarceration itself. There are a variety of other reasons that prison co-ops and co-ops in general are supportive of the abolitionist agenda. But I'd like to pivot to also touch more generally on the cause of economic justice behind bars and the reasons why prison co-op policy initiatives would likely face far less political resistance as compared to other common prison labor proposals. Most obviously, the state will not be required to pay the wages of co-op workers. This eliminates a major political hurdle that stymies many proposals. Less obviously, a prison co-op initiative will benefit from being unattached to a specific wage rate of any kind. This is good because it will avoid the resistance that minimum wage proposals face from centrist and right-wing demographics, while also avoiding the resistance that an adjusted minimum wage proposal would face from leftists. For these reasons, I believe that prison co-op legislation is probably as movable as any prison labor reform can get in our current political context, and should be attempted not only to forward the cause of prison abolitionism, but also to support anti-poverty efforts in marginalized communities throughout the state. Prison co-ops will reduce poverty in the prison setting and in the community because incarcerated people so frequently originate from marginalized communities, and the wealth they attain while incarcerated often returns to families and communities of origin. And prison co-ops will support the creation of a more economically just world, not just by generating and dispersing wealth, but also by building and dispersing cooperative business acumen, cooperative culture, and other tools of economic solidarity. When co-op workers return home, they will carry with them everything they learn while operating co-ops in prisons. Inevitably, cooperative culture will take root in the community. In this way and others, prison co-ops will support the abolitionist agenda. But I must also point out that the question, how do prison co-ops fit with the abolitionist agenda, misses something very important. To get at that other something, we might ask, how do prison co-ops fit into the human agenda? Dignified work is so essential to a healthy manifestation of humanity that I would like to first point out that while prisons exist, and for however long they exist, the people that live within them will desire to live the most full and human lives possible. I've been locked up for almost 15 years on this term, and over the years I've been closely engaged with my community and with the personal lives of my cellmates and my neighbors. In many cases, the people who left the most indelible mark on me, they were the people who knew they would never get out of prison. Some of these individuals left marks on me because they were tragic cases. They never came to terms with their fate, while others left a mark because they so bravely made their peace, because they found ways to live fully despite their circumstances. Somehow, they chose love, life, and happiness, even though they knew they would live the rest of their lives in prison and die here. The abolitionist response to this might be simply, well, we need to push ever harder to dismantle prisons sooner, so people don't have to live their entire lives in prisons and don't have to die in these places, so far from home and family. Not a bad idea. I would love to do that. But in practice, we know these things will take time, possibly a lot of time. So as an incarcerated advocate, I am duty-bound to point out that establishing a legal framework for the creation of worker co-ops in the carceral setting is one of the most important things we can do to support the human agenda, to support the quality of life that is lived inside these walls, and for many people will continue to be lived inside these walls for decades to come. For those who will never come home to their children, the opportunity to earn real wages while incarcerated is an opportunity to maintain a stronger presence in their children's lives. It is the opportunity to give holiday gifts, help with rent and doctor's bills, and help send your children to a better college. It's the opportunity to keep your aging parents off the street. And if your parents live somewhere distant and lack the money to travel, earning a dignified wage in prison means the ability to pay for a trip and receive that visit has been so long in the making. In more ways than I can list, prison co-ops will help transition our society away from the use of confinement while allowing incarcerated people to live more full and meaningful lives while incarcerated. This is what I mean when I say that prison co-ops fit into human agenda. In many regards, the human agenda is the abolitionist agenda. But in those instances wherein those agendas depart, it is my hope that we will be able to create policy initiatives that can simultaneously forward both the abolitionist agenda and the broader human agenda. Prison co-op policy is a perfect example of that kind of policy. And for that reason, I hope the abolitionist community will give this area of work special attention.
Awesome. Thank you, Kelton. Really appreciate that.
Yep.
Yeah, we have about 28 other folks on the call today. Abe, one of the folks on the call, said Martin Barrow would say that the organizing work would help incarcerated folks fight fatalism through empowerment. And you also got from Esther on the call that she's very grateful for these insights.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
But Kelton, I was wondering if you could share a bit about Earth Equity and how it got started and your involvement in that process.
Yeah. There was a precursor to Earth Equity. It was called the Chain Gang Apothecary. Basically, I became involved in food justice work in prison, and we decided that we wanted to bring healing foods into the carceral space and make them as affordable as possible to incarcerated people. So we wanted to create a consumer co-op, like a food co-op, and so we created this organization called the Chain Gang Apothecary, and just like me and a couple of friends, and it kind of was a very small organization. We put together some legislative pitches, and
you have 60 seconds remaining.
I can call back. So, but we got these pitches these legislative pitches into the hands of a lawmaker right in 2020. She wrote back, and they're very optimistic, but you know, COVID hit, and that whole effort got blown out of the water. So,
do you mind,
Earth Equity, when we regrouped,
Sorry, do you mind giving a call back?
Yeah, when we regrouped after the, I'll call back.
Okay, thanks. So just while Kelton is calling back, if folks have questions for him about his involvement in Earth Equity, anything like that, yeah. And sorry, I'm seeing Mary, just you saying that you believe co-op developers who claim to be abolitionists will need to build co-op infrastructure on the outside and push for decarceration policies simultaneously. And so when he calls back in, I'll get him on the call, and you can ask him and see what he has to say while he's calling back. So when Kelton originally reached out to us, he had developed this model called oh, here he is. 1 second.
Global Tel Link, you have a prepaid call from
Kelton.
an incarcerated individual at San Quentin Rehabilitation Center, San Quentin, California. This call and/or telephone number will be monitored and recorded. You have a prepaid call. You will not be charged for this call. To accept this call, say or dial 5. Thank you for using Global Tel Link.
Kelton, you're back on the call. And Mary, do you want to come off of mute and say your comment and ask the question?
Sure. Hi, Kelton. Good to hear you.
Hey.
Hi. Hey, I just wanted to make a comment. You know, I really believe that as co-op developers, you know, claiming to be abolitionists, that we simultaneously need to be working on building co-op infrastructure on the outside and at the same time be pushing for decarceration policies and prison closure. You know, if Newsom really wants to build that Norwegian style prison, if decarceration isn't part of that, he's fooling himself. And if they're going to build a new section of that prison, then they should be shutting down 4 other prisons. So I wanted to know what you think.
Yeah, definitely. It's super controversial. There's the building 38. I've seen the blueprints. I've talked to the architect. They've done PowerPoint presentations here in the community, in San Quentin. So we know what's going to be in that facility. It's going to have a grocery store, cafe, library space, classrooms. There's no cells. It's not expanding the capacity to hold people. It is a lot of money being spent on a prison and on infrastructure, which of course an uncomfortable thing. And also the Scandinavian model is it is a penal approach, so it is an investment in carceral logics, and so it's a huge discussion, but from an incarcerated perspective, fundamentally state wants to put a grocery store at our prison. Everybody here really wants that. And the real question is then, is this project is it really in practice going to cause prison expansion, the building of new facilities, or might it help reduce recidivism? And even though it's kind of a reformist thing, maybe it will help reduce recidivism and, still push things in the right direction. And that's a really big discussion. But from my perspective, having read, I believe, done my due diligence and really reading heavily on reform efforts like this, and also having really sat down with a lot of the people at the heart of this, some of the governor's advisors. I've looked at their histories, their records of work, and also having relationships with, I know the warden, and I'm in very close communication and building relationships with a lot of the officers in this facility that care about this project. And there's something real going on here. I can't promise that it's going to be, I'm not going to try to say that it's going to be a perfect thing, and or that I know how it's going to turn out at all, but I do know that there's a lot of people at the heart of this that are really sticking their necks out and taking risks that people around here are surprised to see people take risks on. So I'm optimistic about it, and I believe that this is not going to lead to us building more prisons.
Thanks for that, Mary, and thanks, Kelton, for that response.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions or comments for Kelton from folks? Okay. Kelton, is there any? Go for it.
Yeah, I'd like to actually speak to that. I wanted to not go on at great length about that, but there is maybe something to follow up sort of comment about that. So I've been writing an essay. I've been writing a very in-depth essay that draws upon extensive reading and my lived experience. And this essay addresses very clearly the concerns that the very, very valid concern that you're raising, Mary. And the question of being able to get prisons.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
In my experience, having taken a good look at what led to recent prison closures that have occurred, and following, justice reform and carceral reform in California for the last 15 years. What leads to closing prisons is the reduction of prison population, coupled with the very traditional abolitionist advocacy that you're talking about, going out and demanding closure of prisons. But it has to be those two things together. You have to reduce prison population, right? Otherwise, they don't show. They won't listen to the advocates asking for prisons closed. And from so when it comes to what reduces prison population, in many cases it's what has done this in California is a lot of incrementalist and often progressive policy initiatives and campaigns, a lot of litigation, and so I'm not in any way, shape, or form pushing back on the idea that we need to go out and close prisons, and we ask for that directly and up front. But what will really result in them giving into those demands is us also doing a lot of other things coupled with it. I'm of the opinion that the reform here at San Quentin, even though in the media there's all this controversy about the building, I believe that what I'm seeing on the ground level here is something, very unusual that that has a very serious likelihood of changing a lot of culture inside the establishment in such a way that we will have better luck reducing prison populations for years to come. So that obviously, to back up that claim, I think I can't do that in a few minutes on a phone call, but I hope hope that, you know, Mary specifically, I hope you'll take a look at the essay that I'm putting out. I'm desperately trying to get it done and to have it do justice to the topic. And I'm hoping sometime in the next couple weeks it'll be ready for presentation. So I hope you'll take a look at it, and you know, anyone else who's interested in this pretty serious question.
For sure.
Thanks, Kelton. And yeah, we got yeah, Danny said, please share widely. So when you're done with it, maybe we can share it, at least with the folks who came today for this call. So we have about 9 minutes left. I'm just curious if folks wanted to hear a couple more things from Kelton, or to hear about the models that we're developing, the cooperative models, and the inspiration that we're taking from to help develop those models. So you throw it into the chat, maybe what you'd be interested in doing for the remainder of our, like, the last 8-ish minutes. I don't mind totally skipping my section if it feels more useful to keep talking and hearing from Kelton. Okay, we got one for co-op model. Okay, we got another for the co-op models. Okay, Kelton, I'm gonna talk about some of the models that we're developing together. So yeah, feel free to stay on the call as long as you can. So okay, what was it? So when Kelton reached out, Kelton sent us a paper that he had written describing a nonprofit custodianship framework where incarcerated cooperative workers would partner with nonprofit custodians that provide prison cooperatives with fiscal sponsorship. And so when we looked at this paper, or yeah, I don't know, since you're here, Kelton, do you want to share any inspiration about the nonprofit custodianship framework? And I'm going to put onto the screen some of the things that it was trying to do. So talking about prioritizing security processes, preventing private interest, ensuring that measures, punitive or otherwise, are not used to induce workers, etc. So just curious if you want to share anything about the nonprofit custodianship
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
That you first shared with us.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So the reason, when I started reading all the material that, well, when I first connected with Ricardo and was introduced to Jessica and everybody, and Mary as well, and everybody started to send me copious amounts of reading material. It was really it was a really wonderful moment, and I absorbed myself into all this literature about prison co-ops in other countries, and I you know, wanting to bring prison co-ops here, and starting to understand some of the difficulties, political difficulties, having a good sense of what the Department of Corrections in California might be okay with doing and not okay with doing. I tried to, you know, it drew my eye to this model in Italy called a social co-op, and the literature that Jessica shared with me, and some of the advice folks in the co-op world shared with me was that, you know, social co-ops in Italy are sometimes kind of looked at as like a little bit paternalistic, maybe aren't exactly the ideal model, but they're pretty good. They do a lot of really wonderful things for, you know, for what they are, and so I thought, well, how could I adapt that idea and make it less paternalistic? Maybe make it. The reason I was attracted to the idea is because I thought the Department of Corrections might be open to it, right? They would put up less of a fight, and it might make it realistic to try to create prison co-ops if if a model like that was proposed. And so, you know, in my lay person's, you know, attempt to recreate that in a way that was less paternalistic but still palatable to Department of Corrections, I wrote this, came up with the idea of nonprofit custodianship, and you know, pieced it together as best I could, and not understanding how to write laws. You know, I put something together which, you know, Ricardo took a look at and said, okay, you know, maybe we can develop this and, you know, take this general intention and, you know, who knows, take it somewhere. But yeah, the idea, the goal is simply to put together a system where incarcerated people, even though they don't own their co-op, right? Because that's what
You have 60 seconds remaining.
Even though the principle of ownership is not there, the idea would be to still create a system by which incarcerated people have full entrepreneurial agency, can have the experience, and attain the financial benefits, you know, of working in a democratized workspace, and learn that model and be able to take that knowledge with them back to the free world, and have effectively the experience of working in a co-op, knowing how to set up and operate, you know, democratized business.
Because you're going to get kicked off, Kelton. If folks can come off of mute and just say hi to Kelton and thank him for his work, maybe that'd be nice. Just really quick before he gets kicked off.
Thank you.
Hi.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
You're awesome.
Kelton.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for being here today.
All right.
Stay well.
Okay, he was just kicked off. Okay.
Great idea.
Okay. Yeah. I just, you know, before you got kicked off. Yeah, we only have like 2 minutes left, so this is going to be super quick. You will get these slides afterward. One of the inspirations that we were looking to when we started looking at models were prisoner-owned cooperatives, because there are prisoner-owned cooperatives around the world. And so looking at those, they're in Puerto Rico, Ethiopia, Italy, Sweden, Canada. I'll share some articles about them. Jessica Gordon-Nebart here in the bottom right came to Selk's office years, 2016, something like this, maybe 2017, with Roberto Luis Rodriguez Rosario, who was part of the prison co-op in Puerto Rico. And so those are some models that we were taking inspiration from. And then we also looked to social cooperatives. They're having a moment right now. There's the Social Cooperative Academy that has already started, put on by the Rocky Mountain Employee Ownership Center. It's free. Just got to go to their website. So we looked at I'm attending those sessions and connecting with the folks who are participating in that, as well as looking to internationally recognized standards of social cooperatives to inform the work that we're doing. And basically, in a really short summary, social cooperatives are, if we think of cooperatives as democratic membership-based organizations that benefit members, social cooperatives have all of those elements, except they put a general interest or general purpose mission before member interest. So usually what that looks like is that any net profit or surplus goes back into the mission, whatever that mission is of the cooperative itself. So there's more nuances, but that's the easiest and shortest way that I can think to describe it. And so what we're developing now is trying to develop a social cooperative model for the prison co-op. So looking at a multi-stakeholder board where the workers, the prisoners as workers would make up a majority, and looking to our own past work in both the worker self-directed nonprofit space that we've been doing a lot of work, and the permanent real estate cooperative model that we've helped develop, so as inspiration. So I think that's our time. We're over time. Thank you very much for sticking around. This is just a reminder that we're part of this is part of our Future of Work grassroots fundraising campaign. So thank you, Itzel, for putting in that donate. And thanks everybody for coming. If you have any outstanding questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat or comments. They really inform our work and the way that the direction that we go. I'm a big believer in living the question, and so the better quality of questions that we can live into, the more aspirational and liberationist we can become. So thanks everybody. That's all of our time.